The broadcast is now on air.
Yeah. So I start now?
Yes.
I'm not terribly bothered about how many people are there today because since it is recorded, and I got a letter from Shashi the other day that she heard the recorded thing, so that is all right. So even if they are not able to be physically present today, they can always hear it on the YouTube at their own convenience. So now we are in the 18th chapter of this book, right? The name of the chapter is the International Age of the Cycle, right? But I will give you first a brief summary of the first 17 chapters. That will help you to understand the remaining chapters, and particularly the 19th and 20th chapter are extremely important today. The curve of the rational age and the end of the curve of reason. Because the whole of the political situation is based on this, right? Governing life, governing social life by reason. So let me start from the beginning. Aurobindo, uh, the book is known now as the Human Cycle. It was originally known as the Psychology of Social Development, and that's a very apt description. The psychology of social development. So he says that human society evolves through 5 psychological stages. Evidently, these 5 psychological stages are not watertight. They're all overflowing one into each other. That depends on the state of consciousness. The first psychological stage of society is the symbolic stage, when men believe more in the symbols than the actual experience of the reality. The next stage is known as the typal stage. The third stage is when the psychology is more conventional, stressing on the exterior rather than on the interior. Then inevitably there is a rational revolt, and that brings about the individualistic age, or what is called the rational age. And then when reason finds that it is not able to grasp all the problems, it has done many wonderful things, but still there are so many things that go beyond it, then it tends to move towards the subjective age, which may lead you to spirituality and to the higher, right? I have used the word which may lead you. It is not inevitable that it will lead. It will lead, but it might take a very long time. So this is the first 3 chapters. Oh no, I'm in a class now, so I can't talk. Huh? I'll talk afterwards, right? Yeah. So, in the 4th chapter, Aurobindo is illustrating on the social level through the nation this whole feeling of subjectivism, right? So, the nation is not a mass of land with a few million or billion people. It is a psychological phenomenon, right? And that it is very important to understand that and read that. And then, towards the end of the chapter, in the next chapter, the 5th chapter, Aurobindo shows clearly that this subjective trend, which ought to end in coming towards the soul, can go terribly wrong. And so there he gives the example of Germany. Do not blame Germany, because Germany is only an example, because this is happening all over the world, individually and collectively. And this is especially important for all those who are seeking for a spiritual life. There is very great chance that you might go wrong. And he has given you 2 very clear warnings there. 2, safeguards. One is that the ego is not the self, because spirituality is the discovery of the self. the ego is not the self, and secondly, everyone is united with all human beings and all living creatures. As long as you don't have these two experiences, be sure that you are not yet spiritual. So this is a very, very important safeguard which we must all have. So this is the fifth chapter. In the sixth chapter, he speaks about the objective and subjective views of life. Since he has spoken about subjectivism, and the modern world judges everything from the objective point of view, he is giving you the two different things, the two different approaches. I will not elaborate on this because I can speak a whole hour on this, but that is not the point. It is just this. The seventh chapter is a typical Aurobindo chapter. He is giving you what, in his opinion, is the ideal law of social development. The ideal law, not what is happening or what can happen, but what should happen. And ultimately, he comes to the conclusion that the ideal law for social development, like the ideal law for the individual growth, is by self-realization. This is the key word, self-realization. In other words, if you want to arrive at the highest possibility of your own development and growth, systems and methods are useful, but essentially it is self-realization. Same thing for the society. But as he says, this is something which is probably not possible today, but whether it is possible or not, it is always desirable to know the goal and move slowly, step by step, towards the goal. So this is a very typical Aurobindonian approach, giving you the goal, giving you even the methods by which you can reach the goal, and keeping that in front of us all the time. Very important for all sadhaks and people who are aspiring for a higher life. I might not be able to do what I should do, but I know what I should do, and I will keep trying to do it. And then little by little, one goes on. So this covers the first 7 chapters. Now, a very interesting phenomenon. The next 10 chapters, chapter 8, Civilization and Barbarism, right to the last chapter that we have done, Religion as the Law of Life, deal with the individual. In a book on society, on social development, he is now bringing you back to the individual. Why? Because as he has said, self-realization is the solution both for the society and for the individual. And since the society is made up of individuals, it is better to come down to individual and try to understand what self-realization means in the individual, in oneself. Then one can try to understand what it means in a society, in a community, in the nation, and on the international plane, in the world unity, right? Because for him the solution is self-realization. So here, giving you 3 very important ideas, 2 very important ideas. He is describing civilization, barbarism, and culture, right? But there are 2 concepts which I want you to understand and look at the world always from this point of view. These concepts are that in the human being, there are 3 planes from which he acts. The first plane is known as the infrarational, which is basically physical and vital. It might be mentalized, right? But when you argue on the basis of interest, likes and dislikes, it is not reason. It is still physical and vital, infrarational. Then there is the next stage, which is genuinely rational, where one is objective, completely detached, seeking for knowledge, and reason is a very important instrument at that stage, right? So that is the rational stage. The third stage is when one goes beyond that, when one becomes open to intuitions, revelations, the higher levels of the mind and beyond mind. These are now what I want you to understand is that this is not an intellectual statement. This is something which you have to experience, right? Experience is extremely important. What I mean by experience is that you have to know that now I am acting from the physical and vital plane, right? Don't pretend that you are acting from a higher rational plane, right? You must be able to identify that continuously. So you will see that in all your activities, there are times when you are on the physical vital plane. There are times when you are completely detached and you are on the rational plane. There are times when you are in touch with a higher light, right? And that is the next plane, right? So this is something which I want you to understand, that it is only by experience that you can understand this book. Any amount of mental argument will not do. Right? I can give you hundreds of illustrations now how things are happening on the infrarational plane, on the rational plane, and on the suprarational plane. This itself is not a very easy exercise. Let me tell you this, right? You have to be very honest with yourself. So this is the first concept which you must understand, not mentally only, but essentially by experience, right? When one is angry, when one is violent, you must immediately realize you are infrarational plane, right? So like that you have to go on watching all the movements and understand this, both in yourself and very important also in society. This is the first point that Aurobindo mentions. The second very important point is that in all human beings, all, whatever is stage of development, there are five fundamental urges, seekings. There is the seeking for knowledge. Everybody is seeking for knowledge, crudely, rationally, or in a higher way. The seeking for God, I can assure you that even the theists and the rationalists who deny the existence of God are in a way secretly seeking for the existence of some power, something which is beyond, right? Which they feel vaguely. So, second one is seeking for God. The third one is seeking for beauty. However crude you are, there is something in man which seeks for beauty. The fourth one is for the seeking of good, which is there all the time dominating us, because at every step in life we are judging. Whenever you are judging somebody, you say he's a good man or a bad man. Look carefully and you will see what type of judgment you are making, right? So there is the seeking for good, and finally there is seeking for life, for the fulfillment of the enjoyment of life through desires, through name, through fame, through power, through sex, through everything that belongs to the vital level. Now all these five urges are there in all human beings in varying proportions. When you say that this man is a great intellectual, that means you are suggesting that he belongs more or less to the higher rational level. This man is a great artist. He belongs, or most of his time is spent on the aesthetic level, right? So these five seekings are fulfilled normally by reason, by the aesthetic sense, by religion, by ethics, and by the fulfillment of life. Now, every one of these, without exception, in all human beings, start from the infrarational. By a certain education and training, one goes up to the higher level, where you come to the rational. And then if you are seeking for a higher anything, knowledge or beauty, you are touched by the super-rational. Now, this is very important to understand because there is no activity that needs to be discarded. Every one of these activities have to be raised from the infra-rational to the rational, to the higher rational, and then led upwards to the super-rational. See, now this is something which is characteristic of Aurobindo. There is nothing that needs to be rejected. And the second very important thing that Aurobindo refers to is that even in the infra-rational, there is a certain kind of knowledge which in the animal is called instinct, but which in the human being is often, disturbed by the intellect. But if you take the example of the body or your gut feelings, you often get absolutely the right inspiration and the right kind of movement. So what I'm trying to get at is this, that do not eliminate anything. What I want you all to do is to look at life, yourself first, that is the first place to start with, and the life around you, your colleagues, your friends, society at large, ultimately even the nation and the international sphere, and see whether they are acting from the infra-rational level, or the rational level, or the supra-rational level. Are they touched by a nobility which belongs to a higher level? You might find that there is a spark of supra-rational, right? And are they really honestly rational, trying to find out the best thing and the truth, and then putting it down? Or are they using their reason to justify their interests and likes? Then it is infra-rational. Today, the modern world is trying to be rational. Every action of any human being is ultimately judged by reason. What happened? Yeah. So ultimately everything is judged by reason, right? Whatever you do, you have to explain by reason. Whether in the political field, economic field, educational field, individual field, social field, you have to explain by reason. Now there you can play a lot of games and tricks and fool people. That is not true reason. So the modern world has gradually moved up to the acceptance that our life must be governed more or less by reason. So this is something that I want you to understand. And this is not a theory. This is something which you will realize. If you look at life from this point of view, you will catch yourself how infra-rational you can be. Then you have to cool yourself off and try to become rational, right? Which is not a very easy thing at all. And then, of course, if you are a seeker for a higher life, you have to practice coming in contact with that higher thing, and that will lead you to what is called the super-rational touch. Once you have understood this, these two elements, that there is an infra-rational, a rational, and a super-rational, and that there are five seekings in all human beings for the higher thing, right? Then you will understand the world much better. And then you must now understand the next part. As I said, first 7 chapters was psychology, right? The 5 stages. The nation was an example of subjectivism. The 5th chapter was an example of wrong subjectivism. The 6th chapter was objectivism and subjectivism. The 7th chapter was the ideal law of social development. The rest 10 chapters are all on the individual plane. Now he comes back to society. The remaining 7 chapters that are coming now, the 18th chapter, is that the society, the infra-rational age of the cycle. That means whether the society is rational or infra-rational. Now you have to be very, very careful here. If I ask you honestly a question, are you infrarational, rational, or suprarational? You will not be able to give an answer saying that I belong to this plane or this plane. You are mixed. Sometimes you are infrarational, sometimes you are rational, and hopefully sometimes you are touched by a higher light, suprarational, right? So if you take the average human being, he is more infrarational than rational. In fact, Aurobindo says he is almost 98% infrarational, covering up under the garb of rationality, right? That needs a lot of training, by which I don't mean education. Education, as it is given, doesn't teach you this. This is something which you have to do yourself, continually by working upon yourself, right? So, just as the individual goes through the infrarational, rational, and suprarational, the society also goes. Now, just as you cannot judge and say Varsha is in the rational level or suprarational level, Kittu is in the suprarational level or rational level, you will find that we are very mixed. What we can say is that X is more on the rational level than on the infrarational level. Y is almost all the time on the infrarational level. You watch carefully at life, you will find there are some people with whom you can't even talk rationally, because immediately they get into a temper or an argument, or right? You have to learn to see things in an objective, detached fashion. This needs a lot of self-discipline and self-work upon oneself, right? Now, if it is so complicated when it comes to an individual, do you realize how complicated it will be when it comes to a society? Now, if you ask me whether India is infrarational, rational, or suprarational, whether the United States is infrarational, rational, or suprarational, or whether Germany is infrarational, rational, I can't give you a straightforward answer. It is very complex, right? But what you can say is that it is predominantly on this plane. Yet you will find all over in every part of the world these differences are there. But today one thing has happened that is for certain, that man has realized that ultimately he has to be governed by reason. That is why everywhere you have come today, in every country of the world, you have a constitution, you have a system, and you have policies. Everything has to follow those three things. They're all rational. You cannot just say that I feel inspired, this is how I should do it, right? You have to accept it as it is, right? So this is a very great step forward, which has taken place slowly from the 17th century onwards, when reason became the king. Society is moving more and more towards that. And that is why today everything tends to be finally decided by the courts. And what the courts say is final. He is more powerful than God himself, right? The judges are supremely powerful people. Because we have accepted this, right? You might be thoroughly dissatisfied with the judgment of the Supreme Court, whether in the United States or in India or anywhere in the world, but there is no other place to go. That is the final stage. That is because we have accepted that reason is the highest instrument that we have at our disposal, at least in collective life, and that ultimately we have to guide ourselves by that fundamental principle. So the next few chapters, in fact all the chapters, the 18th chapter, which we will take up in some detail next time, is the chapter on what we call the infrarational age of the psyche. The Vedic age, we all call it the golden age and all that. That is absolutely not true. What is true is that there were rishis who had reached the highest suprarational level, but the majority of men were, as Aurobindo calls, physically minded. They were touched by the higher power. They were influenced by the higher power, but they could not raise their level of consciousness to the higher thing. This is very important to understand because in every society, and especially in these so-called spiritualized societies, there's an element of the suprarational, element of the rational, and also a huge element of this infrarational, which often comes as an obstacle to the development of the suprarational thing, right? So we are going to take up next time in great detail how the cycle has moved gradually from the infrarational to the rational. So there is one whole chapter on the infrarational age of the cycle. And please remember that every society, like every individual, is mixed. So even in the most savage infrarational society, there is an element of reason, and there are sparks which open them to, but only sparks. Right? In the rational society, there is plenty of infrarational element, but at the same time an opening to the higher suprarational. The suprarational society does not exist, has never existed yet on earth, and it will take a very, very long time before one can even hope to see it realized in actual, I mean, on the ground level, right? So, he will discuss about the Vedic period, about the Upanishadic period very briefly in those chapters, right? Are you able to hear me now? Okay, because suddenly the image is gone. Anyway, the link is there still. So anyway, the 19th and 20th chapter are very, very important because today we are in the rational age and we are trying to govern our life, our social life, by the power of reason. And it is this power of the reason that has created what is called democracy. I would like you to understand this very thoroughly because 99% of the people misunderstand democracy completely. Right? So I want you to understand this thoroughly. So not next time, but the time after that, we will go step by step in all the arguments, and then you will see that democracy is the first step in the development of society by the power of reason. When reason finds that it cannot solve the problems of the world by democracy, then it moves on towards socialism. And then there also you will find that neither democracy nor socialism can really satisfy our desire for an ideal society or a perfect society. Then one starts thinking whether one can move into the next level, that is the spiritual level. So there are two chapters on the reason, the curve of the rational age. The next that deals with democracy in great detail and a lot of historical references also. And then in the next chapter, the end of the curve of reason, he takes up socialism, the theory, the practice, its strong points and its limitations, right? And then he says that ultimately we have to move to the third stage. Now you see, if you look carefully, democracy is based on the first word of the French Revolution, democracy, liberty. Socialism is based on the second word of the French Revolution, equality. So you see, socialism stresses more on equality, democracy stresses more on liberty, but as he says very clearly that if there is liberty, there is no equality, and if you want to bring about equality, you have to take away liberty. You see, now this is a very important thing that you must understand. Because if you want to criticize the government, I can always find fault because they will be either leaning this side or leaning that side, right? So one should be very careful about this. The third word is called anarchy, right? Liberty, fraternity, right? And fraternity means brotherhood. But brotherhood on the rational plane is not brotherhood. It is association. It is forming a party. It is joining together to knock others out, right? That can never lead to true fraternity, right? So that is what will lead us to the third stage. When we realize that the solution of all our problems have to be based on fraternity, then we surpass democracy and socialism. And that is the last four chapters. So the last four chapters deal with the possibility of a spiritual society. And so the first of the four chapters is called the spiritual aim in life. The next step is called the necessity of spiritual transformation. The third chapter after that is called conditions for the coming of the spiritual age. And finally, the advent of the spiritual age, the advent and coming of the spiritual age, right? Now, these are the four steps, and as Aurobindo is downright realistic and honest, it is something which is very futuristic, right? It might take thousands of years to realize itself, even in a small society, right? But always remember, we should keep in mind the goal, and even an inch towards that goal, or even 2 inches toward that goal, is a very major step forward. So this is basically the whole thing. If anybody has any question right now, you can ask me. Otherwise, as always, I'm available on the email. But I would like you to quickly go through the first 16, 17 chapters of the book, right? And very honestly speaking, you will have to read this book not once, but a dozen times. Let it take 5 years, let it take 10 years. It will do two very good things. First of all, by spending some time on this book, you will be in contact with Aurobindo. Secondly, I can guarantee you that your intellectual development will be very, very high. But I tell you, there is no book, no one in this world who is more intellectually developed, absolutely intellectually perfect like Aurobindo. Even if you don't worry about his spirituality, I can assure you that even on the intellectual plane, absolutely perfect, right? I am telling you this because I have tried my best to find faults with him. I have not been able to find anything, right? So this is very important. See, this is very important. You must be a little critical. And when your critical sense is satisfied completely, then it is very easy to surrender, at least to make the attempt to surrender, right? So this is extremely important. So we will read all the chapters, right? As I said, some of them are very futuristic. That doesn't matter. And instead of worrying too much about changing society, we have to start with ourselves. Right? Every step forward that you take inwardly towards becoming a better human being is a help to society, directly or indirectly. By the very fact that you're a better human being, the society is benefiting, whether they realize or they do not realize, whether they accept or do not accept, is of absolutely no importance. So if you want to change the world, change yourself. Right? So essentially that's it. Now, if you have any questions, as I said, you can ask me right now. Otherwise, you can write to me. One of the few persons who writes to me regularly or whenever she has any problem is Varsha. I would request Srirang and Acharya and Vasudev also to do the same thing, right? Because this intellectual stimulation is a very healthy thing, right? Especially intellectual stimulation a la Aurobindo, in the light of Aurobindo and the mother, is extremely useful and so that's it, Donna. Now, if you have anything to ask, anything to comment, or anything to say, can't hear you. Still, your mic is off. The mic is not on. Yeah, now.
Thank you for giving that recap of the first 18 chapters, first 17 chapters.
It is very important if you want to understand this, right? And then go on reading and rereading and rereading. It's a lifetime to understand one book of Aurobindo. And it's a very useful lifetime because it will raise you up all the time. In fact, very honestly speaking today, whenever I feel unwell, if I read Aurobindo or take a class of Aurobindo, I'm absolutely normal. Then again, some problems with the stomach or this or that, right?
Well, we get a brief reprieve while we're studying the book.
Yeah. So, as of now, apparently no question, but I know that there are many people who are a little shy and don't want to ask in front of others. But you can always write to me, right? And I think Mr. Acharya is on Skype now. So if you send me a mail,
I'm on the Hangout now.
you'd like to talk to me on Skype, then I'll talk to you because otherwise I can't be. I have to arrange, I've got so many other things to do, right? So whenever you are there on Skype and you would like to have a question discussed, right? I would not like to talk about the weather and all those things, right? They are very superficial. But if there is any question on Aurobindo or the human cycle, I am absolutely willing to help anybody, either on Google Hangouts or on Skype or on anything that will help you.
Does Basudev have a question?
Notice that. Should the mic also clear?
Would you like to ask Kittu a question?
No, not exactly. No.
Now take your time, don't be in a hurry, and then if you have any question, you can always write to me. You've got my email ID. There is no difficulty at all, right? And then we will continue on that.
Well, we're glad that you were able to come today, and
No, I will come now.
I wanted
Last time
to.
I had to
Go
go to
ahead.
Chennai with the passport, but otherwise, yeah, I look forward to this class because I told you, this is a contact with Aurobindo. It helps me. That's all. Whether it helps you or not, I'm not bothered.
I wanted to make an announcement that since we're doing this broadcast on Hangouts on Air, we're not sending out the invitation until just an hour or so before time to meet. But we'll meet every week unless you get a notice that says that we're not going to meet. So just be looking in your email for your link to the session.
And also, since it is all recorded, and you are putting it on YouTube, right? And if you can be put in an organized fashion, first talk, second talk, third talk, fourth talk. You see, Shashi wrote to me that she was very much, she enjoyed it a lot. Unfortunately, she cannot come at this time because she has certain other engagements in the morning on Sunday. I think now it is in the afternoon in England, right? So it doesn't matter. The very fact that you've recorded it is a helpful thing, and those who want can hear it twice, thrice, and always you can ask me questions.
Hrishikesh wanted us to have a audio recording of it, but I haven't figured out how to do it because it's too large to send through the email. So I've got to figure out how to use the cloud or something.
You can ask Paras Atwani and might be he'll be able to do it. Or he'll be able to guide you.
He's also been traveling, so we haven't been in very close touch. So I guess we've come to the end for today, and just want to thank everybody for logging on, and we'll see you next time.
Right. Okay,
Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you, Kittu Doc.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.